Welcome everyone to CACOR Live's inaugural debate. We want to see if this new format is something that we would like to pursue into the future. So what we've done is we have structured this with two debaters taking different positions or perspectives on a given topic. Each debater will give opening comments, followed by the opportunity for rebuttal to the points made by the other debater. This will be followed by the audience question and answer session, where you as an audience will have the opportunity to ask either or both debaters questions. I would ask that you put these questions into the chat line so I, as the moderator, can call you up in order. So we go from there. Following the Q&A session, each debater will be given the opportunity for closing remarks. After the whole debate is complete, you will be given a poll, an opportunity to answer a poll asking whether or not we should continue doing this kind of debate into the future. With that, I would like to introduce our two debaters for today's session. Canada is prepared for the 21st century. Both our debaters are long-term CACOR members and may be familiar to many of you. The debater who will be speaking for the premise is Tom Dougherty, and he is a retired environmental scientist with experience in the fields of hazardous waste cleanup, contamination, and ultimately was a policy analyst with Health Canada who dealt with such topics as pandemic preparedness, contaminants and toxins in the environment and how they affect everything from obesity to health in general, and how all of these issues are impacting Health Canada's healthcare system. He, in retirement, has been an author and an active member of CACOR. The debater going against the premise that Canada is prepared is Dr. David Harries. He's a nuclear engineer, a former senior military officer, a consultant on personal and corporate security, an advisor and a professor on heavy engineering, national development, humanitarian aid, post-conflict and post-disaster response and recovery, and in an executive development and strategy for Foresight. He's a principal of the Security of Sustainability Guide and a member of the World Academy of Arts and Science and Foresight Lead. With that, I welcome Tom Dougherty to give the first opening remarks for the premise. Tom, to you.
Thank you very much, Jean, and welcome everybody. So the proposition is that Canada is prepared for the 21st century, and I'm going to explain exactly why I think this is the case. See if I can get this thing to go forward. And at the moment I can't. Okay, pause, please. So sorry for the little technical glitch. So here is the pro side for this argument. We've already come through a quarter of this century. We seem to be doing just fine. We can't actually know for what to prepare. We can make some good guesses. We shouldn't waste effort, time, and money on things that won't happen. There's no chance that the sun is going to go nova, and on the other hand, that we could do anything about it if it did. There is time to detect and respond to the threats that we may face, and I think we're probably quite good at solving problems. We dealt with Madison's American patriots in the War of 1812. We beat off the Fenians. We helped defeat the Kaiser and Hitler and their allies. We helped with the North Koreans and the Chinese in South Korea. We dealt with Milosevic, Karadzic, and all their nefarious friends in the Bosnian War and the Kosovo War. We outlasted René Lévesque. We mostly get along well, and we're working on reconciliation. We're well educated and we're pretty good at solutions. Here are some examples. When trains were late, Fleming introduced what became what we use now as standard time. It's actually called World Coordinated Universal Time. Osler and friends helped to bring in diagnostic medicine so we could tell when people were sick and with what. Banting and Best helped us solve the problem with diabetes. Hops dealt with heart disease and brought in the pacemaker as well as a number of other things. Ralston gave us the walker in a much better form than anybody else had done previously. There are all kinds of other examples. We got the practical electron microscope. Nobody had built one that really worked before Canadians at the U of T tackled it. AECL and others built the CANDU nuclear reactor, which we still have and which we're, until pretty recently, still trying to sell around the world. Klein gave us the electric wheelchair. We invented the supersonic Avro Arrow, which exceeded Mach 2. We built the Canadarm, as our friend Art well knows. And we gave ourselves and the world a Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which is pretty good. We can add to it, tweak it, but it's doing a pretty good job. So I would argue that in the past, we've weathered rebellions and wars, we survived epidemics, we made it through the Dust Bowl and the Depression, we went through innumerable recessions, we came out of them. We all hope that we'll be able to deal with whatever we face. And so I would say we are prepared. Over to David.
Thank you, Tom. David, I would ask that you prepare your opening comments.
Well, everybody, I consider myself a PO. That's a pessimist who's an optimist with experience. And it's the reason I have chosen to take this side of the debate. Oh, now we got to. Hi, folks. Sorry, I had the same glitch that Tom had. I am on the not prepared side. If we're talking about preparation, that's about the future. And the 21st century still has 75 more years. And that's 75 more years of the truth under attack, increasingly rare trust, intense increasing global displacement for all sorts of reasons, imposed or otherwise, mutually reinforcing threats and crises, transactional nationalism. Nature is still in control. It has always been so. It is just seemingly more strong than it's been in the past. And something I've watched lately is what I call continuous realliancing, that people are leaving and joining groups with different causes and different sets of causes. The BRICS is the most impressive example that I can make right now. It could, in 5 years, be 20 countries, not just the original 6. The inconvenient truth, as I see it, is that Canada can't be prepared for the next 75 years because of what was done or not in the past 75 years. 75 years. Not the distant past, the past 75 years. Look at the Canadian news from only the last 3 days. I am unable to find a positive piece of news. Some of you will have seen this from my CACOR presentation on 11 September. These were things that were done when we were talking about sovereignty and so on. But I'll leave that for now. But it was what was not done in those 75 years. One, and what we are seeing more and more is any meaningful control of the millions of arrivals, for whatever reasons they arrived and under whatever terms they arrived. I am particularly concerned about the dust up over the victims of communism monument, where we now have a challenge to find which of the 300 people on the monument objected to should actually be objected to. There's been very little responsibility and accountability for failures and omissions in the past. People just move on, hope it'll be forgotten, off the news cycle. Foresight. Harper removed virtually all foresight from the federal government, and that has remained the case as we have, I use the term sleepwalking because many journalists and other people have used that term, as we move downhill. Planning. The future will be different, and therefore planning is vital. And lastly, for me, a former military person and UN person, being an honest friend and ally. Honest friend and ally. Perhaps the last thing in terms of what's happening is there have been no meaningful updates of national policies. Situation report for Canada. It is a post-national state held hostage to 75 years of delusion and decisions, bad decisions, that have left it with few friends and fewer options. But with a poly-crisis within that can only get worse until it gets worse. That's a term from Aaron David Miller, who's a political scientist who uses that term quite often in his presentations. I realize it's a little bit out of context here, but things are getting worse. And that's because the leadership necessary for proactive, timely progress does not exist. Polycrisis within. This is the list I started today. I created it this morning from my notes. And some of the words that I've heard people, wordplay, of course, Parliament is not Parliament, it's parolement. Sitting members of Parliament, by and large, have no power. If the Prime Minister and his PMO handlers do not want something to happen, it does not happen. Confederation. This is the issue of different provinces or different groups within provinces or diasporas or Canadian groups finding issues with our confederation that might not be to their liking. Canada. This from an American group. Canada, because we don't do big projects very well anymore. And redacted, as we've seen in the investigation into foreign interference, every time you try a freedom of information so that civil society can learn what is actually going on, most of the pages are black, which is the reason the background of my presentation today is black. Canada is not prepared for what is coming. Thank you.
Thank you, David. So for the first rebuttal, I call on Tom Dougherty.
So on a couple of things, I'd like to endorse your position, David. First of all, the big one that popped out at me is that, yes, indeed, nature is in control of many aspects of our lives. Regarding your comment on news and whether there was anything positive in the last 3 days, I would say that there's a correlation. This is not causation. News is always negative. Otherwise, it isn't news. I really liked your point that honesty is perhaps our biggest threat. And I was just reading this morning something about how in the election that Ronald Reagan won back around 1980, he promised that he was really going to support the union in which all of the air traffic controllers were working in the United States. And after he got into power, they did go on strike. So what did he do? He turned around and fired something on the order of 12,000 of them and brought in a bunch of new regulations that largely not just destroyed that industry, but destroyed or that labor union, but destroyed other labor unions as well. And really, in some senses, the whole labor movement. You said that it's getting worse. Things are getting worse. And I would argue that you probably hit that on the head, that nail. And that's because of growth. This is like a cancer. I can't think of many things at all that have been positive that came out of growth. And I think you may be right that it may change in the coming 75 years, our entire circumstances, but I don't know how it would even be possible to prepare for that. Over to you.
Thanks, Tom. All your statements on past Canadian successes, I take and as a Canadian am proud of. What concerns me, and one of the reasons I am a pessimist, is because my optimism is now shaded by the fact that our political and cultural and ideological circumstances in Canada make that increasingly difficult. Major successes are now very, very difficult, whether it's because of regulation, whether it's because of personalities, whatever. I see this morning that our Prime Minister has stated that he knows the Conservatives that have been engaged in foreign interference. I can't see any other way than to think that that's the battle that he's trying to win against an individual whose manner and ways and means I'll leave to others to select, is absolutely unknown on the international stage. I tried to find where he had traveled to, let alone who he had met. And from the looks of the polls, he will be the boss soon. And yet not a single world leader knows him. This is the sort of leadership that we will need. In the future, friends will be more valuable than they've ever been before, because none of the problems, even our problems within, are fixable by ourselves. We will have to have help. And therefore, given even only the last 75 years, I am unable to see a way for Canada to be prepared for the rest of this century. Thank you.
Okay, the floor is now open to our audience to ask questions for further clarification if they need them. At the moment, I have not received or seen any questions. So I'm not sure where we should proceed at this point. I'll give another few minutes to see if, okay, Mike Nickerson has come up with a question, followed by Ted Manning. Mike Nickerson.
Okay, I'm wondering how Canada is prepared or preparing for international inequity. With two choices I can understand. One would be to bring the Canadian consumption levels down to an international norm or average, or else to defend ourselves in a way that we can keep our oversized portions. I wonder what comments you folks might have on that.
Tom, you go first.
Okay. Well, you certainly hit a very controversial level. We, on a personal basis, if you include our responsibility for the emissions that come from our industries, are right near the top of the heap on per capita consumption and of fossil fuels and emission of greenhouse gases. This is a situation that over the long term, we are going to have to resolve. The rest of the world is going to come at not just Canada, but other big consumers as well. And we are going to have to pay the piper. We probably are going to have reduced level of consumption, which will mean less activity and perhaps, as Mike Nickerson would love to say, more fun, less stuff. I would also say more fun, but less activity. I mean, you don't actually have to go to Marineland or some park to have fun on some afternoon. Go in your backyard. Go to the local creek and look at the stuff that lives in there. So, I mean, this is a big one. I don't know how we're going to deal with the inequity other than we're very likely to fall back on what we've done in the past, which is try to provide foreign aid.
Population for me is a hugely complicated issue right now. Remember a few years ago, there was all these worries that there was going to be a gazillion billions in the world by 2050 or 2100 or whatever. And I don't know whether that's going to be the case or not. But what I do know is that in the developed world, fertility is way down and falling, and aging is increasing and, of course, rising as we in the developed world live longer because of our health strengths. So the issue of population and what the population wants and needs is a hugely complicated, evolving issue. For me, we've already overshot in many ways, and I believe that. The issue of equality, what does a very aged, developed nation do, A, about its own population, which is going to have to be funded by a decreasing percentage of workers in terms of what humanity, morality, humanitarianism asks of it for the people that don't have its strengths. So I think the population issue is one of the most important ones for preparing for our future. One of the things I will note for Canada is my understanding of the numbers. And in a short debate like this, numbers are almost a distraction. Most of the people that have come to Canada to take us up to 41 million are not old. And therefore, that means A, they could be workers, but B, they will be here a long time and have all the needs, demands, wishes that young people or younger people have. And who is going to support that demand? Thank you.
The demand would be a lot less if we didn't propagandize them to want stuff. It wouldn't be hard to take care of our elders if they just need good shelter and good food and medical care. If they need jet travel and long holidays and high style living, that's another problem to support that sort of lifestyle.
Thank you, Mike. And thank you, gentlemen. We have Ted Manning up and Art Hunter on deck. Charlie Hall, you will be after Art. Ted? Please unmute. Okay, Ted is not there. I'll call on him in a few minutes then.
Yes, I actually am.
Okay.
I just lost, I made my screen the wrong size, so I couldn't see where to hit it. Mike Nickerson's always a wonderful person to follow because he has very holistic lead-ins in terms of where people are really looking at what we want. And that leads very well to what I was looking at, which is how can Canadians define success? what are their assumptions regarding what they're prepared to do and ask for? I mean, I want a palace filled with dancing maids in my yard, but they won't let me have that. And you know, really, what people seek and what they're prepared to do strikes me as being totally dependent on what they expect the future to look like and what they expect their part to be of it. So I would like to ask both of the debaters, what will Canada look like in the future? What will Canadians demand that it look like in the future?
Who would like to go first, Tom or David?
David, you go first.
Which Canadians are you talking about?
Whichever ones you want to bring in or
Well, that's one of my problems with trying to believe that Canada will and can prepare for the future, because right now there is no such thing, in my view, as the Canadian. And therefore, a brand new, somewhat impecunious, approved refugee, 30 years of age, has very different wants, needs, and expectations than the alleged war criminal from Rwanda who only wants to come in here and use his money for a comfortable life and stay undercover. Or the members of a diaspora, like our Ukrainian Canadians, whose families and history and circumstances are under threat that we in Canada can't even imagine. So what Canada will look like in the future will be determined in large part what we are willing to try to do together. And until I see signals of Canadians trying to do things together, then I will remain on the dark side.
Yeah, David, it strikes me that we have really withdrawn from the idea of planning and looking at common futures together. And I know you and David and I and others and Tom were all in the planning business to try and get Canada to try and conceive of what kind of futures might be better than what we were randomly hurling towards. But obviously, as you have very clearly noted, we got rid of that. Many of us were in interesting planning programs, futures programs that actually could influence government. And certainly I despair for us not being able to do that anymore. Anyway, I'll stop there.
Tom, do you want to say anything?
Yeah, just a quick comment. I mean, in the past, I don't think we made any real concerted efforts to generate that kind of singular view of the world. We did fine as we left everybody to his own devices and her own devices, do whatever you wanted kind of thing. Only when we had to face true crises, like, say, the Fenian raids, did we really need to do any kind of concerted planning together.
Thank you, Tom.
It's realizing the limits to growth in various dimensions that probably caused us to realize we might want to work together. But very much so, we have been able to ignore that much more in Canada than many other places, including small island developing states and so forth. So I think we've had a luxury.
Yep.
We have lived a life of luxury.
Yes, we have.
We have lived a life of luxury.
Art has had his question answered, so we have Charles Hall on to ask his question, and on deck is Raymond Lurie.
Hi, sorry, I've got a screen in front of me with a camera on top of it that doesn't seem to be working, so you have to get the side of me. But first of all, somebody said that Canada doesn't have many friends, and I'd like to say, well, I think practically every United States person, at least who knows what Canada is, and I don't know if that's a majority, feel warm and fuzzy towards Canadians is just I just didn't like that statement because I think most people like Canadians. You ought to try being a quote unquote American, a US person. We got a lot more baggage than you guys do. Okay, second thing is I'm an ecologist, and people think that as an ecologist, I'd be all bent out of shape about climate change, and to some degree I am. But as an ecologist, I always was interested in the resources that supported the fish I was interested in. And likewise, I'm interested in the resources that support the United States. And we have, of course, a very wealthy country, very unevenly divided, but it's all in my mind, and I think it's quite easy to demonstrate this, is all based on petroleum, and meaning oil and gas, or 80 or almost 70–80%. And even the others, the PV and the wind turbines and everything are all built essentially with oil and gas. And we would be in really deep trouble right now without fracking. So the point I want to make is count your blessings, because if you need oil, you've got it. You've got crummy tar sands, but you have it. And in my opinion, that gives you far more options. My guess is that fracking is going to, we've pretty much drained the sweet spots, and we're going after ever lower grade stuff. But nevertheless, this year is the highest production of oil and gas in the United States history, and I don't think it's going to last. And the point I want to make relative to this discussion is not a single person has ever said one word about that, I think, except a very few resource scientists like myself and Art Berman. And you have a lot more cushion than we have, except what we can extract from Canada. My guess is. And so count your blessings. Now, there's all these negative things too, and I especially appreciated this redacting thing, because boy, we're dealing with that with all the political problems we have. And of course, we have the overwhelming problem we might elect Mussolini for our next president. But I don't think you guys have potential leaders as horrible as we do. I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Charles.
Well, David might have an opinion regarding those leaders. Certainly I do, but I'm not going to voice them here. I would say that most Canadians whom I have ever known certainly wanted to keep Americans as fuzzy friends. We've had a few times in the past when there were definitely differences between us, and it led to some pretty bad outcomes. But we largely have put those differences aside and gotten along. I think many of us have been surprised, appalled even, to have watched the United States descend into darkness. And you know, you're certainly circling around the bowl. You have a real potential for violence as a result of this upcoming election, no matter what the results are. I don't know that we can help with that. We probably can't. Maybe we're going to
count your blessings.
Sorry?
Count your blessings.
Yeah, maybe we're going to throw open our doors and welcome in Americans the way that they did back in the 60s when Americans were trying to avoid the draft.
The points were your points were, how I say, convergent into a number of issues. I don't think I said nobody liked Canadians. What I'm saying is people in countries that used to be positive friends of Canada are now what I guess I can title frenemies. Normally, without provocation, there are friends, but they are quite astounded at what is or is not happening here. And one of the reasons for that is our Prime Minister. And I have, because of my 6 years at the National Defense College, I have connections and colleagues all over the world in politics, the military, business, academe, UN, who are astounded at how a country like Canada is able to have a prime minister who says what he says and does what he does and makes promises that are impossible. And if you go through my little list of the poly crisis within, the business about military goods and services, the business about whose side are we on in Ukraine, the business about what we're going to do with immigration. I mean, Mark Miller has just been praised for admitting that things are screwed up. I think he actually used the word out of control in terms of immigration. So until we are more honest with ourselves, our friends are going to be more often suspicious. You raised the issue about the fisheries thing. For me, 10 years ago, as an outdoors person who brought up my two sons outdoors as much as I could when I was home, I just almost was sick to my stomach when it became necessary for park rangers to be armed. And now what we're hearing is that Department of Fisheries officers have to be armed because they're receiving so many death threats or other threats. Now, where is this coming from? I'm not sure. Leadership, not sure. But the thing that worries me most is not whether Trump is a good or bad leader or a fascist or whatever. It's the fact that more than 40 million Americans, the richest and most powerful country in the world, will vote for him. And if he does not win, they will be angry. And I haven't seen yet any preparations here in Canada for dealing with that anger. I have two professional friends in the United States who have already started emigration procedures to come to Canada because they are frightened. One in Boston and one in Houston. Neither of them have been to Canada. They usually took their holidays in Florida or Latin America or someplace. They're both they're both middle, upper wealthy, and they're coming. They don't care. They will be a refugee if they have to because they are so frightened. These are difficult times. And guess what? 16 October, 5 November is coming very quickly. And I don't see any plans for what we're going to do on the 6th of November. Whether it's a statement, whether I presume we won't have a Canadian federal election by then. Will Mr. Trudeau phone Mr. Trump if he wins and congratulate him? Rhetorical question. Thanks.
Thank you for that. Thank you, Charles.
As I said, count your blessings.
We have Raymond Lurie up next, and on deck, Nigel Weir.
So my question is for the both of you, and I just heard you, David, talk a lot about the U.S. situation, and from my perspective, truth and trust is particularly under threat in the U.S., not necessarily just here in Canada. From my perspective, what matters? That we be better prepared than the U.S. and other countries, or not, right? I mean, in relation to what are we prepared? What's the definition of really being prepared? Because to some degree, as you've both said, there's some limit as to what we could anticipate will happen in the future. So
Given the education system we have, given a bunch of things that have been done in the country over the last decades, I see some level of preparation, but again, we don't know what the crisis might be, and I'm certainly not particularly optimistic about the electoral situation here in Canada. Regardless of what Charlie said about the U.S. and others have said about the U.S., right? I'm concerned about what's happening here. Are we different from other countries, and should we be concerned about that?
Who would like to go first? Tom?
Sure. Well, let me start with the last question. Are we different than other countries? I don't think we are substantially. There may be other countries that have got a more sort of, a stronger leader, let's say, who's got and a group around him, because of course leadership is never one guy. Hitler had a whole bunch of jerks around him. They had a vision about where they wanted to go. They wanted to take over the world. I don't know that there's anybody out there who's really in that class at the moment, but there certainly are countries that have a more focused view of where they want to take their countries, and sometimes that involves taking over other countries. I don't think Canada's like that. I think that's because, in part, we have a melange of people here, and we're not pretentious. I think you were right when you talked about the education system being perhaps something that's greatly to our advantage. I think we can probably detect and develop systems for correction much better than some other countries can. Sometimes countries just get completely taken by surprise. Sri Lanka comes to mind. Darn place nearly collapsed and people were starving just a couple of years ago. But you're right in terms of definition. We need one. And perhaps it comes down to what I just said, the ability to detect and correct your course as events evolve, which is why I think it's so important that we choose people based on their ability to analyze, not on the promises they make, because we've seen people from every single political party virtually anywhere in the world make promises they never intended to keep, like Reagan.
Thank you, Tom. David?
Wow. Are we different? We're all in the same world. I mean, this is everything from, limits to growth, to climate change, to pandemics, we're all in the same world. But we are different. And we are different starting right from the very bottom, something you've all seen me state before. Every single human being has a unique suite of biases, assumptions, and interests that are changing all the time, depending on the situation. And every country, therefore, is different. And we are different, luckily. I mean, count your blessings. One is we have been so lucky not to have been massively attacked, massively sanctioned, massively sick, massively under threat, unlike so many other countries in the world. But I don't think we've made use of that luck the way we should have. We did in those 75 years up to 2024, 25. We didn't remember when you read the investment committee waivers at the bottom of the page, it says previous gains do not indicate that you're going to get gains in the future. But then you read from your financial planner, it says be informed. So I think we're in this gap between hoping that what was, the blessings we have, will continue without work. And in the world that we live in now, my first slide about the list of what the next 75 years is going to look like, I don't think that's the case. We are going to have to earn our luck from now on.
Thank you for that. Now, Nigel Weir, you are on deck, you are up, and John Legg, you're on deck. Please go ahead, Nigel.
Okay, well, actually, Raymond pretty well mirrors the question I had in mind, which was in this question of readiness, are we worse or better off than other developed nations? And I've had two pretty good answers. Now, just follow-up thoughts. We often read that Europe is perhaps more progressive in terms of its reduction of greenhouse gases. Whether they're any better off, I think the real threat is growth, and whether there's an active race or nations who are doing better in turning down growth. I don't know. I suspect that's a bigger problem. Anyway, so I don't expect any replies to my question. Thank you.
Thank you, Nigel. John Legge, you are up. And on deck is John Hollins.
Let's see if my...
You're ready to go, John. Go ahead.
Thank you, Jean. I would like to compliment both our debaters. Talk about a good lesson for the House of Commons. I mean, how civilized all this is. It's amazing. Anyway, I think that the growth point, and I forget who made it actually, it may have been Tom, but the growth point shows that our species, that is Homo stupidus, has shown that we will forever be unprepared. As a group trying sincerely to be prepared, we are against a continuing majority, that is, the majority that believes that growth is a good thing. Now, just to give some light to Charles Hall's comments, I thought it was delightful. There used to be a saying among the Canadian Foreign Service officers in the department that the Americans are our best friends, whether we like it or not. And I think that adds a bit of truth. But the problem is, and this is my last point, I think there's a saying which is something like, if you can't measure it, you can't control it or judge it. And of course, the reason is it keeps shifting. That is the place we live. It just keeps moving and shifting. Can we ever believe in limits to growth? I don't believe it's possible. Anyway, but I congratulate you two. And if you have any feedback on that growth business, I'd be delighted to hear it. Thank you.
Thank you, John. David or Tom, who would like to go first?
Yeah, I'm not sure this is directly dealing with growth, which is a different topic in my view, one on which I've made my views well known to CACOR in the past. But this idea that things keep shifting is, I think, very germane to the debate today. If things are constantly shifting, what becomes important? Seems to me it's a bit like playing goal in hockey or soccer. You better be on your toes. You better have balance. You better be able to respond. You better be able to detect, and your reflexes had better be darn good. And you better know what to do, because if the guy looks like he's going to shoot for the bottom corner, you sure don't want to jump up.
David,
No.
to you.
Oh boy.
I liked your analogy.
Yeah. The sports thing. Very few sports that aren't teams. And teams are what counts. So if you're the goalie, you better be sure that your defensemen are being defensemen and your forwards aren't being lazy. And that the rules of the game haven't changed since the first period. So, huh. The public health thing. I mean, there's another article from the last 3 days. We are trying to get a handle on public health data. But apparently, there's 260 different places. That was the figure I saw, excuse me for saying this, in one of our national newspapers, where it is measured, but there are no standards of measurement. One of the things we had until 75 years ago was some pretty clear demands. We sort of had to win World War II, one way or another. And then after that, it got a little less simple, but it was still more or less uncomplicated. We had good guys and bad guys, and you were with us or you were against us. And after about 1990, 1995, certainly 1995, the year I left for Indonesia, things got really complicated. And they've been being recomplicated ever since, or decomplicated and then recomplicated ever since. So I don't know. I guess one of the definitions we need, what is measurement anymore in something that is I don't know, a threat or an opportunity? Well, yeah, go, Dave. Yeah, go.
Just a quick comment, and I believe, John, that the original was if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. But and I had been sucked into believing in that for a while, but I've come to the opposite conclusion in the last few years. And now I would actually tell you that if you spend all your time trying to measure it, it probably doesn't matter.
Okay, thank you, gentlemen. John Hollins, you are up, and our final question will be delivered by Fernand Faulkner. John?
Thank you, Madam Moderator. I have a quotation to offer. In fact, I've got two. Churchill, Winston Churchill, that is, in 1947 in the British House of Commons, made a very, I'm going to paraphrase it dreadfully, that it has been said that democracy is the worst form of government except for all the other forms that have been tried from time to time. Because I think the question on the table today is ultimately about how Canada is governed. I would observe, my first question to both of you, but especially to David, I think, was Churchill right? And the second part of my question is, if he was, you've got a choice of, I don't know, 40, 50 other democracies in this world. Have you got plans to emigrate, David?
David, over to you.
I mean, we've all heard that quote from Churchill in 1947. Context. I think we all know that recently Freedom House, or not recently, Freedom House every year puts out a democracy index. And which countries are democratic or near democratic or not democratic. And the measurements have been changing every year, and democracy is going down. I watch that, but I am not totally concerned because I am not sure anymore what democracy means. Two reasons for that. One, we have countries now with a majority government led by a leader whose party was elected by less than a quarter of the eligible voters. So democracy, elections. But I think in the democracies, only Australia has a law that says you must vote. Others can correct me if I'm right. You have to vote. Now, you can vote and cross out everything, but you have to vote. We don't have that in Canada. So if democracies are truly a function of elections, so that civil society has a say in who is going to lead them and govern them, then that seems to be a requirement. That seems to be a measurement metric that is necessary, a right to vote. Then that worries me a bit, because in dictatorships, autocracies, and things, there's no confusion about who's in charge. Right now, I ask everybody today, who's in charge of Canada right now? Who determines if tomorrow will be good, bad, or indifferent for Canada? It's a competition. It literally is a political competition. And that worries me, because Churchill was right, but he was right at that time. Is Singapore the model that we should follow? Probably impossible. Tiny little country, very mixed population, a history where had to break away from they had to get independence. Uh, I, the democracy thing has always worried me. It goes back to when I was in East Timor, right after the Indonesian army torched Dili. And the UN came in and said, we'll solve everything. We'll have elections, and you can have people that you can vote for and will govern you. Well, they did that, and guess what? Everything broke out again. Because guess what? They hadn't taught the losers that losing wasn't death. Nobody educated them what in democracy losers face. In autocracies and dictatorships, the losers know exactly what to expect. So is clarity a factor we should really be concerned about? Our next election, what if it's close? Are we going to have another stitch up between two parties? So, yeah, Churchill was right, but sometimes he's wrong. And I'm afraid that today we don't know. I certainly don't.
Thank you, David. Tom, do you want to make a comment?
Yeah, I do have a comment, and that is this regarding Churchill. He was wrong in this way. Democracy, as he was describing it and as he knew it at the time, as he had experienced it, was better than all the others, but we had not tried different forms of democracy to an adequate extent, which is why I wrote about a 5 or 6 page essay that's still on the CACOR website about how we could improve our governance. We could do much better. We could have, in a sense, a more responsive representative government by making sure that everybody who had the capacity to do so was eligible to be in the government. And I thought about this for a long time, put out a pretty detailed plan of how you can transform our parliament into one where every citizen who's competent has the right to serve and can get selected in the same way that he or she can be selected to sit on a jury. So that's where I'd like to see us taking. That's where I'd like to see us taking it. And as far as emigration, this is quick. No, there isn't anywhere else I'd rather go.
John, do you have a quick follow-up before we go to Fernand?
Small comment to add. David referred to Australia as being the only democracy that obliges citizens to vote under threat of penalties, and mentioned refusing ballots. In Canada, that's probably what I'll do at the next federal election, because I can't vote for a party led by the current Prime Minister or the presumptive new Prime Minister. I have voted in every election I've been in Canada for, and I don't intend to stop doing that. And I'm not going to waste my vote on some small party So I think I'm going to refuse my ballot.
Thank you, John. Fernand, as our final questioner, over to you.
I just have to follow up on that. I was in Australia. We were there only 3 weeks, and there was an election, and we didn't vote. We didn't think that we were part of having to vote. We didn't know enough to vote. And somebody knocked on my door, and it was a policeman saying that we hadn't voted. And this took me as a surprise. And then we did plead that we didn't have enough knowledge to vote, and they dismissed the fine. So I can, but I want to follow up with a question. Like, we are talking a lot about the political context, but there's other forces at work in society that really do shape where we're going. And I've been following some studies on public opinion in Canada, and it was called the 5 Canadas, and they were segmented from progressive to very negative. And in those studies, it showed that there is a 30% in the middle who doesn't care about transition away from fossil fuels, but the majority right now does care about a transition from fossil fuel. I know that a lot of the people participating in these discussions have worked for government, have been part of big exercises, trying to achieve solutions in whatever way. So I guess my question is, we're talking about the 21st century, and the big issue there is, will we be able to transition away from fossil fuel and gas? And we do see that in some countries they've reached a 50% level. We do see a lot of evidence that there is slow, but sometimes not very well broadcast progress. So my question is, bringing it back to that transition, what future do you see for Canada in the 21st century, and will we be able to achieve a transition?
Thank you, Fernand. Tom, David, would you like to respond, please?
I have a response, but a big finger. Will we be able to transition? Will I be able to win the hot dog eating contest? I'm not trying to be funny, but I don't know until I try. And I'm not too sure whether we've really tried to make a plan for this. We have so many competing voices right now. But I was educated as a nuclear engineer, and I am following closely the nuclear renaissance. There seems to be an article a day about Amazon, Google, the Bitcoin miners, everybody else saying they can't operate without nuclear power. So I sort of set myself back somewhat comfortable by saying that a transition away from fossil fuels may be possible if we use our brains, and there's some leadership to do continuation of nuclear energy. So this is not a transition. Continuation of nuclear energy smartly, cleverly. There. That's
Tom?
Yes, but.
So I'm all for that. I think that the answer for Canada is, given the current political climate, we're not likely to get a complete transition fast enough. But I would argue this, the more important question is whether the world is going to go through that transition. Canada's a very small player. We only got 40 million people, as David said earlier in the talk. We have plans to go to 100 million, which I think is very much misguided. But what matters most is what's going to happen in places like the BRIC nations that David mentioned, the United States, the UK, the rest of the EU, and in fact, Africa. Africa is the elephant in the room. If they all want to live like Canadians, we're in big trouble.
Yeah. In fact, you mentioned the EU. The EU is in chaos right now, politically, economically, energy-wise, security-wise. I mean, every day there's another example of the EU. That U is very, very, very small. European Union. It's almost de-unioning because of the biases, interests, and assumptions of EU leaders. And as long as the Ukraine conflict is on and not, I don't even know the word for it, turned into, at very least, an armistice. And I just, the last thing I want is for Canada to follow any examples from the EU. How about England? I mean, England, Great Britain, independent Great Britain. Has it's made a huge transition, or it's trying to make a huge transition, but now it's backstepping a bit. What can we learn from that? Yes, we can transition, but.
Okay, thank you. I would like to bring this question and answer period to a close. So we have the opportunity now for each of our debaters to give their closing remarks very briefly. I would like to call on Tom to do his first, and then David. Tom, you're up first. You're muted.
Going to work here. Okay.
Yes.
My conclusion is this: Canada can use its resilience, intelligence, positive outlook to handle anything short of a catastrophic natural phenomenon beyond human control. If it turns out that there is a giant comet that's headed straight for us, there's nothing we can do. That said, that makes us prepared for the rest of the century.
Thank you. David.
If we are much smarter, and if we somehow come together, or remove ourselves from being a post-national state, and we reflect on our successes in the past, i.e., we don't ignore our history, I think we have a chance. But frankly, I don't think we have a chance in the next 75 years. So I hope in the next 75 years, 1 January 2022 or 2025, no, I'm all mixed up. 2100, 1 January 2100, that nothing that Tom has described happens.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. And this concludes our first debate session. And I would now like to ask our audience who are left, we do have a poll that is going to be coming up. And the question we have for you is, would you like to see other debates, potentially on a topic of different choices? Would you like to see other debates? So please select your answer now, a yes or no, and they will be compiled and available very quickly. I'll give you all a minute or two to do this.
How do I take the poll?
It should have come up automatically on your screen.
Yes, Charlie, you can vote. Yeah.
What?
Yes or no, it should have come up on your screen, a poll.
Can I vote verbally? Because I don't see it.
Yes, you may.
Okay, yes.
Okay. I'll give another 30 seconds. And in the meantime, I would like to say thank you very much to Tom and to David for the work that they've put into this and the considered thoughts they put in initially and being taken by surprise by what people have said and questions that they asked. So thank you very much for that. The results of the poll have been 88% of the people say they would like to see further debates at some time in the future, and a few people who have said no. So with that, I would like to say thank you very much to everybody for participating today, and thank you to Tom and David. I would now like to turn it over to our president or chairman of our board, Ted Manning, to thank our debaters. Thank you.
Thank you very much, guys. I think we had a very good start. I think we can maybe get some even more contentious questions put in front of people. I know we were talking about nuclear or not as one. Another suggestion I think I heard the other day was immigration or not, various ones like that where we can get experts from different things. So definitely, I think let's open the floor to that. Secondly, voting. Kim Jong-un runs his own democracy, and he has no problem getting 100% of his people in agreement on paper every time. So there's another model, and should he decide to do something like drop a bomb on us or solve climate change within his own country, it is totally within his own personal capability. Just a thought, not a model. But that's one of the issues of dealing with states. I work a lot in small island developing states where a little more homogeneous and they tend to agree with each other more, so maybe they have a better chance. Anyway, I would like to thank you very much for raising the questions and coming up with a number of reasonable answers and challenging each other in a very civilized fashion. How very Canadian of you. So thank you all for very much the session. It was worth seeing, and we will try and have another one. So here comes the commercial. For those of you who wish to stick around and talk, we will turn off the recording. And we would also ask those of you who are not members, and very soon we will be asking for your annual membership dues through our new wild apricot system, which supposedly will make it much easier for people. So don't hold your breath for it, but it's just around the corner. So thank you all very much for coming, and please subscribe to YouTube if you are going to watch this on YouTube. And I would now like to turn it over to everybody who wants to stick around and talk to each other without recording. Thank you very much.